My name is Brandon Sanderson. I'm the author of the Mistborn Trilogy, the latest book of which is The Hero of Ages. Go check out brandonsanderson.com for sample chapters and annotations of my work and all sorts of fun things. Well, every writer has their own story of how they got discovered, and I've heard it said in the business that it never happens the same way twice. For me, I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was about 21, and about that time, someone told me that your first 5 books are generally terrible, which for some people might have been very discouraging, but for me, I thought, well, that's great. I don't have to be good at this for quite a while. I can just write and enjoy it. So I just started writing. I started writing the ideas that were in my head. I really didn't know what I was doing, but I was exploring. I tried writing several different books of several different genres. And I actually wrote 5 books. Different. One was a humor piece, one was a science fiction, one was a fantasy. I really liked the fantasy book. It was my favorite, and it's what I'd read a lot. And so when it came time to write that 6th book, I still had in my back of my head that, your first 5 books are terrible, and I have now hit my 6th book. This one's got to be the one. And so I sat down and I wrote a book called Elantris, which was based on an idea I'd been working on for a while. And I got done with that book and I said, this is the one. This is going to do it. It was a standalone epic fantasy novel that I was really, really excited about. And then I started sending it out and I started getting rejected. And that can be kind of discouraging. You always hear that every writer goes through a host of rejections before they get published, but it's still hard to go through it, particularly when you think this book is the one. But I kept writing. I never stopped, even though I had a book I thought really was the book that would do it, and I continued to work on novels. I didn't really do much with those first 5 because I considered them practice novels, and I continued sending Elantris out while I was writing other things. Well, eventually, I started to do some networking, started going to the conventions, started really learning the business side of it, and started just sending books out to editors by name rather than just by company. And at a convention, I met a guy named Moshe Fader, who I really connected with. He was an editor at Tor. The books that he'd worked on in the past were authors I loved, their works, and he and I had a really similar philosophy about books. And so I asked him if I could send him a novel, and he said sure. And so when I got home, I took Elantris, which had been rejected a number of times, and I said, okay, I'm going to give this a really good revision, and I'm going to send it to this guy and keep my fingers crossed. And I sent it to him, and didn't hear back. Heard nothing. Months passed. I sent him an email saying, hey, did you get this? He said, yeah, I got it, but it's really long, it's really ambitious, and that's not a bad thing, but he says it might take me a while to get to it. I'm just not sure. And so months more passed. I assumed it was just gone, that I had no chance on that one, and I continued working on other books. And then 18 months after I'd sent that book out, I got home. I was in the grad school at that point. Got home from school, checked my voicemail, and there was a phone call from a guy named Moshe Fader. A voicemail. He said, "Hi, I don't know if you remember me, but you sent me a book a long time ago. In fact, so long ago that your email address has now changed. It bounced when I tried to send you an email, and your phone number had changed. I got a disconnected phone number, and your address had changed, and so my letters came back returned, and so I Googled you, and I found your grad student page, which I hope this is the right Brandon Sanderson, because if it is, I want to buy your book." And so I immediately called him back, but that's how the story, essentially how it went, is thank goodness for Google, and thank goodness I decided to put my phone number up on my student page at college, because otherwise, who knows what would have happened. Every hotel desk clerk you meet probably has a book or a screenplay on the side, and so, it's that starving artist sort of thing. And you really, really dream about it, but you never are sure if it's actually going to happen. And I got that phone call finally, and I honestly just about dropped the phone and collapsed to the floor. It was a voicemail, actually, that I got. I didn't talk to the editor until afterward. And I got that voicemail, and my immediate thought was, oh, this can't be happening. This is one of my friends has called me to try and trick me, or he doesn't really want to buy the book. He just wants to reject it in a very nice way. My agent later told me, no, people don't call you to reject you. They send you a letter to reject you. They call you to accept you. And so I called him back, and I couldn't believe it was happening. I talked to him for a good 2 hours. Just about the book. He'd actually only gotten a couple 100 pages into the manuscript. When he finally picked up the manuscript, it had been 18 months since I'd sent it to him. When he finally picked it up and started reading, he said he read all night and got just a couple 100 pages into it before calling me and just wanting to make sure it was still available because he wanted to buy it. And so I spent the next week with my head in the clouds, just completely befuddled by the fact that it was actually happening. Elantris is an interesting book. In epic fantasy, it's usually all about the big series. And I like big series. I love reading books that, where you can read book after book about the same character. But I also love the concept of the standalone. And I particularly think that a single book that wraps up its entire plot line is its own special art. And I thought that breaking in with my very first book, the thing I would want to do most is have it be a standalone so that people could give me a chance and try one of my books without having to get into something really big. They could try a single book and know how I would plot and how I can do a climax and bring things to an end. And so it's different in that it is a standalone, and there aren't sequels to it. I later did a trilogy set in a different world, but this is a standalone. And it also is interesting. It doesn't follow some of the standard cliched plots of the fantasy genre. There's no quest. There's no young hero searching for a magical object. It's something different. Elantris is the story of a magical city of the gods, it was called among these people. And what would happen is, in this kingdom, there was this force that no one understands, but it would randomly choose people and grant them divine powers. Their skin started to glow. They could draw runes in the air that would do these powerful magics. And once you were chosen by this force, you became one of the gods of these people. You would move to the city of Elantris, which was the capital, and from there you would rule with all the other Elantrians, as they called them. There were hundreds of them. Well, the book is unique in that that's not the story. The story starts 10 years before the book actually starts, and something goes wrong. The magic stops working. All these people who had these divine powers, they lost them all. They caught this sort of magical leprosy, this disease that turned them all into these poor wretches. And they lost all their powers, and the kingdom just about collapsed. Imagine what would happen if you're not only your ruling class, but the divine gods of your religion just suddenly were cast down. And to a person, they all lost their abilities and just became the lowest of the low. So the common people and the merchant class took all of these people who were their gods, and frightened that whatever they have might be catching, they locked them in the city of Elantris and just tried to forget about them, turned it into a big prison city. Well, this force keeps picking people, and now it curses them with this disease. And the book is about the crown prince of this kingdom who catches this disease. Whatever it is, the force chooses him and turns him into one of these poor wretches, this terrible disease. And his own father covers up what happened, throws him into the city with all these people who used to be gods. And it's the story of him trying to survive in there while also trying to figure out what happened 10 years ago. Where did the magic go? What went wrong? It's his story and the story of his fiancée, who's living outside in the new capital city. She's trying to figure out what happened to him because of the big cover-up. And so it's political intrigue on her part, searching for what happened to him, trying to keep an invading force from conquering, and he's on the inside just trying to discover the secrets of what happened. And this is kind of a different story for the fantasy world. Instead of being about a peasant who becomes a king, it's about a king who essentially becomes less than a peasant, becomes less than a beggar. His own religion says that he's now damned for eternity. He's lost his soul. And it's kind of the story of what it means to be a king or to be a pauper, and what does it mean when everything turns against you? How do you see yourself in the world now? And can you be happy as one of these poor wretches, or do you have to just give in to your fate? And it did very well. Went through 3 hardcover printings, sold in I think 14 languages. I was just incredibly excited about how much people have enjoyed it, because it was a little bit risky, I thought, in a genre populated by the big 12-book epic, releasing a standalone. But we've been very pleased with how it was received. The Mistborn Trilogy was the series I released following Elantris. And I knew I wanted to follow up with something a little bit longer. Elantris was a standalone, and I wanted to try my hand at a series. And I had made a name for myself with Elantris for being someone who does something different with fantasy. Doesn't do the same sort of things, but I want my books to feel like fantasy. I want them to give you that same feeling of epic wonder that you get in a good fantasy series. I just don't want to do the same stories that have been done a lot. And so with this, the inspiration really came from 2 places. I love the fantasy genre. I read a lot of the fantasy books. I love the classics, Tolkien. I love Harry Potter and the Robert Jordan books. And these books all kind of share one similar plot element, which is kind of about the young hero who goes on a quest to defeat the Dark Lord, which, a lot of my classic favorites in fantasy deal with this. And I thought, is there something different I can add to this? I was actually watching one of the Lord of the Rings movies and watching Frodo go on his quest to fight Sauron and defeat the Dark Lord. And I thought about Harry Potter with Voldemort and all these, and I thought, these Dark Lords always get taken down by these, peasant kids. What happens if the Dark Lord wins? What happens if the peasant hero loses? And so that idea kicked around in my head for a long time. And I began to think of this story where, there had been this young hero who'd gathered an unlikely band of followers, and they'd gone traipsing off on a quest to defeat the great evil, and they lost. And the Dark Lord took over the world and began to rule. And, that's kind of a depressing story. I didn't want to start with that. I didn't want that to be the whole story, but that was a beginning. The other seed for this story was my love of the heist genre. I love the old Mission Impossible TV show, which, you've got a gang of specialists who can each do something really unique, and they get together and try and pull off something impossible. And I have often wondered, why don't I see more of this in fantasy? It'd be a great sort of way to apply the genre. Each person in our team could have a different magical power. And these 2 ideas ran together, and I began to conceive the story of a world where the hero had lost. And now, 1,000 years later, we've got this gang of thieves who say, okay, the peasant hero, he didn't save us. Those prophecies, well, they were all bunk. We're now ruled by this terrible dark emperor. Let's do this our way. Let's rob the guy silly, bribe his armies away from him, and overthrow the empire. And so it's kind of a different take on this same story, and that's what I did, and it turned out to be kind of a mix between Lord of the Rings and Ocean's 11 and a kung fu epic, and a little bit of My Fair Lady thrown in there for good measure. So it's kind of its own unique thing. Well, Mistborn, the series, is a trilogy, and progression from book 1 to book 2 is an interesting one, in that when I was originally conceiving this trilogy, this series, one of the things I wanted to do is tell the story of what happens once the heroes have already won. I wanted to start where the story usually ends, because one of the things I like to do is try and turn the genre on its head, do new things with the genre. When I was planning the series, I decided that, the story of the heroes winning is a great story, and that's one that I wanted to tell. And so I actually backed up by a book and started with book 1, telling this story of the fight against the evil empire by a gang of thieves trying to rip off the Dark Lord himself. But book 2 then kind of starts where my original concept had been. What now? I won't tell you how book 1 ends, but we've got the heroes having done something pretty spectacular. It's where most books usually end, most series usually end. And book 2 takes up there and says, what now? What do you do now that you've pulled off this great accomplishment? And it leads me to some really interesting places, I think, in the series, because I get to tackle things that most people haven't covered. Most series are done by now. And it lets me kind of forge some new ground in the fantasy genre. How do Vin and Ellen change during the course of the story? The series is about them. It's about progression. I talk a lot about the plot for books. For instance, the Mistborn series is about a group of thieves over taking out a Dark Lord. But books, for me, are about character. Action is only as interesting as it happens to people you care about, in my opinion, and a setting is only as fascinating as characters' ability to interact with it. And the progression, who characters become, is really where I think fiction can shine. In a different medium, you just don't have the time to do what we do, and we can show across a span of years how someone starts as a street urchin and ends up as a queen. You can show this, and you can show the internal changes and the struggles inside of them that leads to this. And the story about for Vin and Ellen is the story of them coming to accept each other's different worlds. Vin starts as a street urchin, and she understands that life. Ellen starts off as a nobleman, and he understands that life. And as they start to interact and begin to have romantic interest in one another, their two worlds sort of collide and start sucking each other into each other's world. And Vin's progress is learning that there's a part of her that can survive in this world of nobility and of balls and of political intrigue. But Ellen just as much needs to understand that there's a need to be able to survive kind of on the street, to be able to take care of yourself rather than being pampered. And it's kind of a role reversal for the two of them, how it works as the series progresses. Hero of Ages is the third and final book in the Mistborn Trilogy. One of the things I love about this book is that it is the ending. I like to end things. I don't want to leave people hanging. I like my stories to come to a conclusion, and I promised people at the beginning, when I was writing the series, that it would be 3 books, and I would give them a dramatic, powerful ending. And endings are my favorite part, honestly, of novels. In a given novel, I love telling the ending, and book 3 is kind of a book that is an ending itself. The entire book is an ending. It's a big climax, and it's exciting, and it's powerful, and it kind of fulfills things that have been building in the series for 3 books now. I was able to write the trilogy straight through when I was preparing, and so I had book 3 drafted before book 1 even went to press, which allowed me to really make these 3 novels cohesive. I have seeds in the very first few paragraphs of book 1 to things that become climactic, powerful moments in the end of book 3. And so book 3 is just an overload of action and excitement and character climaxes and just an amazing just romp through this series. And so I'm really excited about people being able to finally read it. It's been waiting for quite a while for me to make good on the promises I gave them at the beginning. Great thing about book 3 is we introduce a completely new magic system. Each book has had their own. We start talking about hemalurgy and the Steel Inquisitors and where they come from, and a lot of the origins of things that people have been wondering about since book 1. And the last 200 pages are just some of my favorite writing that I've ever been able to write, because I was able to bring things to a head and to a close. And so I hope you enjoy it. In 2007, one of my favorite authors of all time, Robert Jordan, sadly passed away. Long before his time was due. The whole community was struck by the tragedy. And I had been reading his books since I was 15, and the first one came out in paperback. I can remember when I walked into the store and saw this new book on the shelf, and it had this amazing cover, and it was big, and it was thick, and I was just getting into fantasy books, and I said, wow, there's something about that book. And I picked up a copy and read it and just was hooked forever. It was Eye of the World was the name of it. And Over the next 18 years, I read this series of 11 books and a prequel as they came out. Right when they would come out, I'd go and get the new one, and then I'd read back through the whole series and read them again. And they're just, it's the great fantasy epic of my era. People before me read Tolkien. I read Robert Jordan. I eventually got into Tolkien, but Robert Jordan is part of what just propelled me into being a fantasy novelist myself. And I absolutely loved these books and was waiting with everyone else for book 12 because it was going to be the last one. And then Mr. Jordan passed away. Robert Jordan was one of my great inspirations. I kind of look at him as I don't know, my master in a way when it comes to teaching me how to write. I would study his books when I was just a teenager, thinking about someday I would like to write not fantasy novels myself, and I would get them out and I would read them, and I would look at them, and I would see how he would plot, and how he would do character, and how he did viewpoint, and all these things. And even though I never had met him, I kind of looked at him as something of a father figure. I think the whole fantasy genre did. And when he passed away, we all felt a little bit orphaned. Well, I assumed that Tor would have someone picked to work on it. I figured it would someday come out. I never thought that it would be me. I got up one morning and there was a voicemail on my phone. This is actually the second time this had happened to me because when I first sold my very first book, I found out via voicemail, and so I'm glad I have a cell phone with voicemail on it because I answered this voicemail, and it was Harriet Rigney, Robert Jordan's wife, longtime editor of his books. And she called and she said she had something she wanted to talk to me about, and I had no clue that anyone was even considering me. And so I called her back, and lo and behold, she wanted me to complete the 12th book of the Wheel of Time, which, I mean, this is the sort of thing that you don't even dream about working on because you can't even conceive it. It's the series you've been reading since you're 15, and now you've been called and asked to work with the master and take his notes and the things that he has written and put them together and write the last book. And so my next project, after Well of Ascension, we actually have another standalone of mine called Warbreaker coming out in the spring, and then that fall will be Book 12 of the Wheel of Time, which I'm now working on quite extensively, spending quite a bit of time on it. It's going to be a big, great book, and he actually wrote most of the last portion himself, but I'm working on putting together all the notes and writing the holes and following what's left and what's in the outline and just making this book. And that's what's going to come out, should be, we hope, fall or winter of 2009. We're not exactly sure yet because I haven't finished the novel. But that's what's next. And so exciting to consider. It's so exciting to work on that. This is just the most amazing project I've ever been a part of. The soul of the whole book is there, but the whole writing isn't there. He left an outline, and there are holes in the outline. There are things that I'm going to need to put together. But at the same time, he left 12 books worth of material, 11 books and one prequel's worth of material, pushing toward this last one. And all of that weight is kind of like a mountain pushing forward what's going to happen. And he was so good at foreshadowing and so good at plotting that it's all there, even in the things that aren't there specifically in the outline. And so people ask me, how much of this book is yours? How much of it is Robert Jordan's? And my answer is, well, it's all Robert Jordan's. It's all his. In a way, I look at myself as the journeyman craftsman. And if the master has trained you, and the master has come up with the patterns for the chair or whatever it is that you're working on, and the apprentice comes along and finishes a chair the master has worked on, that's the master's work, even if the apprentice helped out. And I'm really the apprentice, or the journeyman in this case. And even though there's a lot I get to do, a lot of work I get to do, there's a lot of scenes I get to come up with and write on my own, it's his book. And my goal in writing it is to make it so that no one can tell where my work begins and his ends, and vice versa. I want the book to just be a joy and a delight to read, and I want people to be sitting there thinking, how much did Brandon write? How much did Robert Jordan write? Just read the book and enjoy it because it's all his book, even the parts that I may have to come up with on my own. I don't think that anyone could actually fill Robert Jordan's shoes. He's the greatest writer of my time, I believe. He's the greatest writer of epic fantasy that we've had since Tolkien, and I can't be him. I can't fill his shoes. Without the outline material that he left behind, without his assistants and his wife, who was his editor for so long, there's no way I could do this. But at the same time, it's just amazing to be able to look at what he had left behind and see into his mind in a way that I think no one else really gets to. I get to see the work as it's unfinished, yet he's left enough that I can imagine the book as it would have been when it was finished, and I can see the process. And it's really an unrivaled opportunity. I can't think of anything that's quite like it. The chance to just work and look through the notes and the materials and to gather them and say, what was he doing with this? Where did he really want this to go? How can I take this character who he's been building to a climax for 11 books and say, how am I going to take this character and fulfill their character arc? And how do I apply the notes? And how do I take the chunks that he actually wrote and weave them in so that my own writing and his writing meld together and produce a Wheel of Time book that everyone's going to be excited about? And beyond that, I think he's watching and saying, okay, what are you going to do, Brandon? What's going to happen? And I want to do something he'd be proud of. I think it's both the greatest and most frightening opportunity anyone could ever be given in this business. But it sure is a lot of fun to work on. It's been probably the most fun I've had working ever, to just be able to do this. He was a very positive, upbeat man, extremely good-natured. Everyone who talks about him talks about just how kindly and upbeat and positive he always was. And right up to the end, he was on his official blog and to people saying, I'm going to beat this. He had a degenerative blood disease, very rare, and he said, I'm going to beat this. I'm going to be around for another 20 years writing books. And I think that positive mindset really helped him. But near the end, he began to make provisions for the last book. I spoke with his wife and with his cousin about those days, just trying to get into his mindset. And really what impressed me most was he wanted to make sure that the fans were taken care of. He knew how many people were waiting for this book, and his fans were so dear to him that near the end he wanted to make sure that we knew everything that we needed to finish the book, and that he wanted to make sure that his wife had the materials and the tools she needed so that she could find somebody. And near the end, he wanted her to go and find someone to finish the last book so it would come out so the fans could finally read all of this. And so I think he knew that he wouldn't be able to finish it himself. It was very hard for him to face, but he made sure we had what we needed to so that we could all read the book. His wife, Harriet, is just the most amazing person. Before I even met her, I had 3 independent sources that I really trust contact me and say, Brandon, she is the best editor in this business. There is nobody quite like Harriet. And just having worked with her for the last 6 months, I agree with that. She is amazing. She knows this series and these books like nobody else. I'm convinced she knows them as well as Robert Jordan himself knew them. She's been working on them since the beginning. The first pitch to Tor, she's been involved, and she knows these characters like we know our best friends and our family members, and she has been a shepherd and of this project ever since the beginning. And working with her has been amazing. The next best thing to having Mr. Jordan himself here to write this book is having Harriet to be able to guide and take care of the project and say, no, this character's not quite right, or you've got this one dead on, and let's make sure that it feels right. There are things that Harriet knows that no one else knows. At least, I hope I know most of it now. She's written down a lot of things, but even still, I'll be working on a section, and she'll say, oh, you need to know this, or this character needs to do this. And she really does have a wealth of information just inside of that head of hers that's been working on this for 20 years. She really is close to this project, and she understands it. How have things changed since I submitted Elantris to Tor. For one thing, I'm a full-time writer, which is just wonderful. It's what I always dreamed of doing, and now I have time to work on projects and on side projects. I get to do this full-time. Beyond that, I get to be part of the community. The science fiction fantasy community is amazing. Everyone is so helpful. All the other writers, I'm just amazed at how kind people are, how willing to help out the newbie. My life has changed drastically. There are people who know me that I've never met. There are a lot of them. I get dozens of emails from them every week. And I feel kind of a strange sense of responsibility, honestly, to the community now, because the relationship between writer and reader is an interesting one. It's a participatory art. Whatever I write on the page, it doesn't come alive until the reader reads it and imagines it, and the book becomes theirs at that point. The characters become who they imagine them to be. And I feel a responsibility to those people who are reading the books and supporting me. In maybe the same way that, in olden days, you would have the performer who would be on the street getting paid just by the kindness of those passing along the way. In fact, you still see that quite a bit. And I feel like I'm the same way. I'm employed. I make a living. I get to do these wonderful things, come up with these stories and work on them because of the reader's willingness to support me. And that means I feel that I need to produce the best stories I can for them. Not just dust off an old book that I wrote 10 years ago, but always be giving them my best work. And it's a strange sense of just weight of responsibility to make sure that I'm producing things that people are enjoying and always doing my best work. And that's different. I used to just write for myself. Now I write for everyone who enjoys my books. One of the question I get a lot from readers is, how do I write books myself? And so I started up a podcast called Writing Excuses, in which two writing friends of mine and I get together and we just talk through various aspects of writing in a very kind of fast-paced, enjoyable way. And so if people are wanting to learn to write books themselves, I suggest Writing Excuses to them. And you can just find it at writingexcuses.com or through my website. One of the things I'm really excited about in entertainment these days is the behind-the-scenes sort of look you get on the DVD extras when you buy a movie. You can hear director's commentary, you can see making-of sort of videos, and I wanted to try and do some of that for my books. And so my own website, I started doing some annotations of my books, where I'd read a chapter from one of my books and write what I thought, how I came up with that chapter, the ideas in that thing, and I started posting those on my website. They've been enormously successful. It's kind of like a director's commentary for the book. And so my website, I try to make the behind-the-scenes extras DVD for all of my books. So if you have questions about what I was thinking when I wrote a particular chapter, you can go to my website, brandonsanderson.com, and you can look up all sorts of fun things, sample chapters of new books I'm working on, just a lot of exciting stuff going on there.